What's going on, everybody? Welcome in. It is the Wrestling Matt. I am Matt Camp. Thank you for being with me here on this Tuesday. If you're a Matt member, you're getting it early, as we are going to be doing going forward right here at the WrestlingMatchShow.com. Members get the show live as it airs at 11 a.m. Eastern every single weekday. Shout out to Nerdy Dude already here in the chat. Nerdy Dude got his pro wrestling tees. Wrestling Matt merch. You got a little bit more. Posted, I saw it on social media this morning. Head over to ProWrestlingTees.com/The Wrestling Matt. Get your Wrestling Matt merch. Saw he's got the little corner logo on the black shirt. Good to see there, Nerdy Dude. Thank you very much for making that purchase. And because you're a member, you got a discount on that, as anybody who is a Matt member can get. Go over to the WrestlingMatchShow.com to become a member. And now with that member perk of getting the show first and before everybody else, access to me at 11 a.m. Eastern every single weekday. You see our levels there right above Todd, starting at $2.99 a month. Matt Camper at $6.99 a month, and the Matt event at $24.99 a month. Lot coming your way for the month of November, just a couple of days away from that. So make sure you go check it out at thewrestlingmatchshow.com. If you're watching at 5 Eastern, if you're here on our YouTube channel, down below, right there, hit that join button. Leave us a comment as we talk about the show here if you're not live in the chat at 11 a.m. Eastern. Now, if you are in the chat later on in the day, on the 5 p.m. Airing of this, and you leave a super chat, they will be answered within 24 hours. We'll do it on the show the next day. So super chats are certainly helpful. Great way to support the show, as are subscribing for free to our YouTube channel here at thewrestlingmatchshow.com and wherever you get your podcasts, thanks to our friends at the Believe Network. Anywhere you get your podcasts, you can come and subscribe and listen to the show that way as well. But if you're a member, you get this show first and live at 11 a.m. Eastern every single weekday. So thank you for being a part of that. If you ever have questions about memberships or anything to do with the show, hit us up at WrestlingMatt23 on Twitter and Instagram, and me at the Matt Camp on Twitter and Instagram. I was on Busted Open after dark last night, breaking down Monday Night Raw. But I only get an hour to do that. I guess I do an hour on the show too, but no commercials in this show, so I get a little bit deeper, and always with a little more time to digest the show, a couple more thoughts. So today we're going to get into a few things. We saw the Usos last night on Monday Night Raw, opening the show. We'll talk about that interaction. We're going to talk about the interaction that they had with Sami Zayn, and then the interaction we saw in the background of a conversation between the Usos with Sami Zayn and Solo Sikoa. So that are a few interesting nuggets that were dropped into this entire story. And interestingly enough, and once again, no spoilers here on this show, I am aware of what is coming on Friday's SmackDown, double taping last week because of the Saudi show this weekend. I'm not going to spoil that, as it was announced, interestingly enough. We are getting the 6-man Bloodline match at Crown Jewel. Surprising to see that we're getting that match. Maybe because the Saudi show, Roman's got to be on it, but it will be Roman's second match back. Still not in a singles match yet, interestingly enough. But he will be tagging with Jimmy and Jay. And I'm surprised at how they announced it, just kind of dropping it on social media. And I'm surprised they made that announcement before any kind of strong back and forth between Jay and Roman Reigns. Now, I think we're expecting to see that on SmackDown this week, on Friday, but that will be 24 hours before the show. So I think they need to connect the dots a little bit as to why this match has been made with the outstanding situation that remains of a conversation that probably needs to happen between Jey Uso and Roman Reigns. We'll get into that a little bit more. I want to talk about Big Bronson Reed and Seth Rollins last night, and something Bronson Reed has now been associated with that I think is, in a way, comparable to Stone Cold Steve Austin, and also comparable to Braun Strowman's initial push as a solo star. We'll get into that. It's a very good thing. We'll get into that as well. And, because Raw didn't really give us a hell of a lot else, this morning, I wake up, and about 10 minutes later, I see this announcement from WWE about this WWEID program and the partnerships that they are and have established with multiple indie companies around the United States, and what that means for the recruitment process, what that means for the independent scene, what that means for those promotions that WWE is now working with. There's definitely some pros and there's definitely some cons, and we will get into all of that coming up on the show. Dude says, I have a question. How was your day so far? My day was fine. A little doctor visit this morning for my brain. Feels good. Nice to wash the brain on Tuesday mornings. Everything else is good. Glad to be with you. Like doing this morning show. I kind of get right into it. I like being able to get my thoughts out. And then, for the members, getting that out there first and foremost, being able to talk to you guys and kind of go from there and see what the rest of the day brings. So we'll get into this new indie wrestling development program that WWE launched. But let's talk about Raw last night. And where we're at with this bloodline thing, I am mostly on board with. And I am willing to let them see this thing through, wherever it's going to go. And it is now allowed the bloodline story to bleed into both shows. No pun intended. To bleed into Raw, to bleed into SmackDown, because Jey is a Raw superstar. And part of me thinks that they have kind of run through this a little fast. Jimmy just a couple of weeks ago telling Roman, we need him. No yeet. Okay. And then Jimmy goes to Raw and Jey kind of blows him off. And then Jey loses the IC title. Then he costs the Bloodline the tag team titles. And it just seemed like it happened so fast. It seemed like Solo and Jacob decided to get into Jey's business quicker than I would have expected. And now you've made he's been an enemy for a while, but now it's more direct. And I felt like that was a bit rushed. I thought the conversation last night between Jimmy and Jey was very good. It's a lot of the things that I think needed to be laid down for the groundwork of what this is going to be going forward. Jey making it very clear when he said we're not the ones anymore. He made the point, and it's the exact point that needs to be made about all this. They are not in the shadow anymore of Roman Reigns. They can't be treated as little brothers. They can't be treated as underlings or henchmen or anything that isn't about them in the end. I loved Jay's line of, they don't confuse us anymore, Oos. Yeah, we're twins, but they know exactly who we are. You're Jimmy and I'm Jay. Now, to that point, while you can tell them apart, they've also changed up their looks enough now that they've set themselves apart. And that's with hairstyles, and that's with merch, and that's with their ring gear, all that stuff. And that helps too. But the point remains the same, exactly. They're individuals now. This is not the Usos that are part of the bloodline. This is Jimmy Uso standing side by side Jey Uso, and eventually standing side by side with Roman Reigns. But they have to be equals. And Jay was talking about that last night. And the crowd was with it. And he's right. That's always been where this needed to go. You can't lose Jay's momentum. You can't lose the perception of him being a very popular top guy on his own. He made it clear to Jimmy, if we're going to do this again, we do this for ourselves. I will back you because you're my blood. But this is not about the Usos. This is about all of us standing on our own. And it's the right tone to set. It's where this needs to be. I mean, theoretically, this is why Pro Wrestling 101, you put factions together so down the road, people come out as bigger stars. It's evolution. Here's Triple H. Here's Ric Flair. Here's these two upstarts. Here's Batista and Randy Orton. What happened? Both guys walked out of the group as world champions and then remained that way. Triple H was a mid-carder with China when he entered DX. Then he took the group over, and then he became the guy. He got more out of the group. Just a couple obvious examples. The bloodline, theoretically, helped produce singles, merch mover, Intercontinental Champion, star on his own, Jey Uso. He wasn't in that position before the bloodline. He was a great tag team wrestler in a great tag team that was really starting to figure out exactly who they were with promos and Uso Penitentiary and all that stuff. But the bloodline gave Jay and Jimmy their own personalities. And Jay has really flourished with that. Jimmy is just starting to. So the group has allowed, the original group has allowed for growth. And that growth is now being acknowledged, once again, pardon the pun, within the story. And that leads me to what they did after we saw them in the ring last night. They meet up with Sami Zayn. And the weird part of all of this is that Friday's show is done. You had to connect last Friday live to Raw knowing what you've already shot for Friday night of this week. Out of order, basically. And they were able to do that quite well because of Sami Zayn. Because of Sami having the interaction with Jay. And Jay trying to tell Sami, hey, I think Solo's worse than Roman. And Sami's going, yeah, so what? Who says you have to take anybody's side? Look what you've done already. And then Jay hits him with something that I saw a lot of people react to. And Sami, because he's a pro, reacted accordingly of, you wouldn't understand. You're not blood. And that line to me, not that it was hypocritical, but it hit in a way where you think about the fact that Jay's own blood, Roman, Solo, Jimmy to an extent. Think about Royal Rumble last year. Think about Jay walking out on that. Thinking about how he struggled with that whole thing because he initially pushed back on Sami being in the bloodline, and then at Survivor Series a couple of years ago, he embraced him. And that wasn't about blood. Because when it comes down to it, Sami got out of the bloodline. And then Jay, 6 months later, was out of the bloodline. And then Jay ended up on Monday Night Raw because of Cody. But who was his only, not only, but who was his major ally there? It was still Sami Zayn. So Sami is stuck by Jay. Sami has always tried to talk sense into Jay. And Jay's own blood fought him. Sami Zayn, not blood, backed him. And yet, last night on Raw, Jay says, you wouldn't understand, Sami. You're not blood. And that's the first time that Jay has said something that has not been universally loved. It's the first time he has said something in quite some time where you went, hey, Jay, wait a minute. Think about what you've done with Sami. Think about how close you have been and are, and the fact that, Sami said, I'll always have your back, Goose, that kind of whole thing. But you wouldn't understand because you're not blood? If anybody understands about this entire situation, it's Sami Zayn. He was in all of it. Remember how this all started for Sami Zayn. He was conspiracy theory Sami Zayn. Then he did the stuff with Johnny Knoxville. And he came off of WrestleMania and went into a feud with Drew McIntyre, if you remember, a couple years ago. And was basically a mole in the locker room for the bloodline. And that just rolled in to him being a full-fledged member of the bloodline because him and Roman clicked. But he went from punching bag, comedy act, to an important part of the group, to the heart and soul of the group, in a way, and was a huge part of why it was such a big story. And pulling on the heartstrings and the Rumble turn last year and the KO match and, the match in Montreal, Elimination Chamber, winning the tag team. I mean, he's not in the family, but, man, he's as close as anyone's been outside of Paul Heyman. So Jay saying that last night should have bitten Sami, should have hurt him. And then later on, Jay asked what's up with Jimmy. Or Jimmy asked what's up with Jay with the Sami conversation. There's not much to that, but as the camera not only gives you the background of Solo talking to Sami, they zoom in on it last night. And you see Solo, who had showed up at the beginning of the show to go after the Usos, talking to Sami Zayn. And when you've now made a point to have the Usos on the show 3 different times, to show 2 different interactions or 2 different appearances of Sami Zayn within all of this, you have planted those seeds. You have planted the seeds of Sami is going to be involved. Now, there's the obvious of him deciding, I will stand by you, Jay. I will stand by you for you. I will stand by you because you stood by me. You picked me over your family. We both realized the same thing about what was happening within the bloodline. And Sami could stand next to Jay and say, I'll stand next to you. because it's you. And I don't want you going in there. Let's say it's War Games next month. I don't want you going in there without an ally that you can trust. It's bad enough that you're going to have to take on Jacob, Solo, Tamatonga, and Tonga Low. That's going to be tough enough for you. But I'm worried about you having to put your trust in Roman. How could you? How could you feel like you can trust him? Who's to say they're not all in on it? Whatever. Who's to say Roman doesn't have a bigger plan? We know he wants to be champion again. How did he become champion last time? We all protected him. We all made sure he kept that title. Now he needs our help. But for what? Why does he need our help? What's the goal? So we can get back to the championship? Sami can say to Jay, I will back you up because you need someone you can trust. And I don't trust, and you shouldn't trust Roman Reigns. They could go down that path. That's one thing to do. The second thing to do, let's say Roman and Jay figure their stuff out this week. They have that match at Crown Jewel. But they realize it's not over yet, and do it again, and they're going to be outnumbered. And what I would say to that is Roman has another chance to pay respect. Roman needs, first of all, obviously, to show that respect and acknowledgement to Jey Uso. But I think Sami can be next. And that's my whole point of stretching this out. And maybe this is why they got Jay on board a little quicker than I would have liked. Because the next person to get is Sami Zayn. And I bring up everything about Sami Zayn's start in the Bloodline and where he went because initially Sami was just happy to be part of the group and was kind of treated as such. And Roman was like, this guy's funny. I like having him around, but he didn't take him seriously. And he would earn respect over time. And Sami did the bidding. And Sami was as part of it as anybody else. But it never felt like Roman fully looked at him as being on the level. Now, Sami took him to the limit at Montreal, and he didn't win. And other than the appearance at WrestleMania, where he got involved in the first Cody Roman match, that's kind of been it for Sami Zayn and Roman Reigns. That's pretty much been it. So now we come back around, and if they need a fourth, and they will, Roman has to give Sami the respect he deserves. Roman has to say, you're more than an honorary Uso. Roman has to give Sami the respect and love he deserves. Not the comedy guy. Not the guy he kept under his thumb. Not the guy he, let's be honest, used. If Roman, Jay, Jimmy, and Sami are going to be on the same side at War Games, they have to view each other as equals. It has to be done. I would also say that I don't think Jay and Sami should stick around with the group past Survivor Series. I think they can step in for the night, but it's important for them to go back and carve their own paths. Believe me, there is money in putting that original bloodline back together. There is money in doing so with them as baby faces. I equate it to the Shield. The Shield were heels for a long time, but they were exciting, and people wanted to see them, and people knew stuff was going to go down with those guys. But they were heels. And at Survivor Series a couple of years ago, when Sami, took out Kevin and came together, and it was him and Jay coming together, that was a big reaction. That was a big moment. That solidified the bloodline for what they were going to be. It broke up 2 months later, but you know what I mean. Now imagine those four guys standing together as baby faces. Imagine the camaraderie, the chemistry. Think of how into their segments people were when they were heels. Usi, all that stuff. They were beloved. Sami's making everybody crack. Sami's making people laugh in backstage, saying all that. He got Roman it, but they were heels at the time. Now you basically get the permission to cheer them. That's massive. You're going to get multiple moments out of that if they go in that direction in the next month. Now, if they go in that direction and they find that chemistry and we see it on display once again, it's going to be fun to watch for everybody except one person. And this is why I love the way the prongs of this story can go in multiple directions. If Sami Zayn, and Nerdy Dude just brought up the man I'm going to talk about in a second. If Sami Zayn decides after everything that went down that he is going to stand alongside Roman Reigns and be on his side, what will that do to the psyche of Kevin Owens? Kevin Owens, who I've detailed and talked about yesterday, is now the chaos in WWE. A man who was beside himself because he watched Cody put everything behind him and stand by Roman Reigns. Because he watched Randy Orton try to be the peacemaker and take up for Cody. And what did that do? And this is where Kevin is at now. Go back to the Royal Rumble last year. That unbelievable scene where Sami won't hit Kevin and he hits Roman instead. Where Sami's trying to convince Kevin to be his friend again, and they have that embrace in Montreal. And they come together and they win the tag team titles, and they have that moment. Think about all that. Think of the journey that needed to be taken to get those two back together. Only for Sami to stand beside Roman once again. Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn have been feuding for about 20 years. They've been partners. They've battled in PWG. They've battled in Canada. They've battled in Ring of Honor. They battled in NXT. They battled in premium live events. They battled on pay-per-views. They've won together. They've lost together. They've been heels together. They've been baby faces together. And amazingly, there's a fresh chapter to write if they go down this path with Sami Zayn. They had that WrestleMania match a few years ago in Tampa when Logan Paul was involved. And I was happy that Kevin and Sami got there. But it felt kind of thrown together. Little story about this. That was Sami doing the whole conspiracy thing. And he had this documentary he was putting together. That documentary was made. That documentary never aired because Vince hated it. Didn't like how it was put together. He didn't like it. He didn't think it was very good. And the Kevin-Sami match that happened at WrestleMania probably had the least amount of heat and personal animosity of anything they've really ever done. And there was, 25% of fans there, and Kova was going on. So I'm happy Kevin and Sami have a WrestleMania match against each other to their name, but it didn't have the same kind of juice as everything else. They could 100% lean into that, and we could get a proper, heated WrestleMania level match between Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens next year. They can write another chapter to that story. And it's an interesting chapter because, as many people have made the comparison to Drew McIntyre, there is a lot of justification in Kevin Owens' feelings towards Cody, towards Randy, and maybe eventually towards Sami Zayn if he sides with Roman Reigns. I've said it all along. Kevin has been the constant in this whole bloodline story in terms of opposition, to the point that it has taken over the majority of the last 4 years of his career. And he won the tag titles at WrestleMania. Yes, he did. But he has been driven mad by not really ever being able to get away from any iteration of the bloodline. And then he's going to see his best friend, who he had to watch, side with the bloodline. He had to let Sami figure it out for himself, and then he reunited with him. He's going to see Sami go back with those guys. What kind of mindset, what kind of explosions will that set off within Kevin Owens? And you have a very interesting dynamic there where people love Sami Zayn, but would they understand where Kevin was coming from? Would they even lean into the fact of, hey, we always seem to be fighting or come back together? Would they lean into the fact that they've done this so many times that there is no coming back from this? That there is no, we're going to reunite. There is going to be, no. Sami, I watched you go through this already. I felt your actions physically when you became part of the bloodline. How could you possibly go back? How could I ever look at you the same way again? Forgiveness for Roman Reigns? And there's a very psychological story to tell about that, of two friends who think in different ways and have justification to think that way. Two friends that understand each other in a lot of ways, but in other ways like this, they don't. Sami generally being the nicer person, the more forgiving person. They got something big there. That's why I keep coming back to Kevin being a very interesting character right now. They have a lot to explore. They have a lot of stories to tell. They have a lot of money matches to make in all of this going on. Could be a hell of a ride. On Saturday, we're going to see Bronson Reed and Seth Rollins. Last night on Raw, Seth comes out. He's talking about Bronson. And we cut back to Bronson, who's going, hey, I'm right here. I'm in the parking lot. Let's do this. And there was a murmur from the crowd when he said that. And when it was obvious, Seth takes the blue jacket off to reveal the same thing underneath, whatever. But shit's going to go down. And that is now the reputation of Bronson Reed in the best way possible. He has been presented as this monster that will cause destruction. Slamming people through the mat with tsunamis on the car, all the stuff with Braun. They have made Bronson Reed into someone you have to sit up and pay attention to, because he's not out there to cut a promo. He's not out there to be boring. He's not out there to do anything but spectacularly destroy people. That is who they have conditioned the audience to expect. So then when they show him last night and they take the wide shot for a second, they allow us to realize, oh, they're going to have a brawl. And then Seth goes out there and he gets the better of Bronson and he hits that stomp on the car and Bronson sells it like death. And I went, okay, that makes sense, because I think Bronson's going to win on Saturday. So let's let Seth have this hope spot. And by the way, the fact that I even just said that multiple-time world champion, one of the greatest resumes in WWE history, Seth Rollins, needs a hope spot against Bronson Reed, who has nothing more than a North American championship to his reign, tells you the great job they have done in putting this feud together. Seth, as a babyface, has been portrayed as someone who has a very big uphill climb in front of him because Bronson took him out, because of Bronson's ability to destroy. They have made Bronson credible. People believe, at least I do, that Bronson can beat Seth Rollins on Saturday at Crown Jewel. We have seen enough of what Bronson Reed is able to do against others and against Seth. And last night, when Seth stomped him on the car, Bronson didn't no-sell it, but he was able to shake it off enough to keep battling Seth, who was trying to cut a promo to the camera. And then Seth got Death Valley drivered off that truck into tables. And they made a big point later on in the show of Joe Tessitore wondering about Seth's health. So you're building in Seth going into Saturday at less than 100%, and you're building in a bit of an out, and you're protecting him in a way, and that's fine because it's right there for us. It didn't seem forced. Sometimes you see that, we're like, oh, they're trying to injure somebody, so there's an out. And no, it seemed like a logical part of the story. And Bronson should win because it will do nothing to Seth. It won't hurt him in the slightest. The right finish of Saturday's show is Bronson beating Seth Rollins. Not Seth winning because he was 3 seconds better on a roll-up or something like that, or, he reverses something, and then Bronson beats him down after. No, Bronson should win. And Bronson should try to beat him up after so Seth has a reason to go after him again. And you continue to establish a monster, top-tier heel in Bronson Reed because you need those guys. You need them for babyface champions like Cody Rhodes. You need that. Seth can make that happen. Seth, to me, has become bulletproof. Within the company, definitely. Think about what Seth did this year. He gets put into this match with Jinder Mahal at the beginning of the year that ends up getting all this extra buzz because of the tweets with Hook and Tony Khan and USA Network and all that stuff, and Jinder himself. And Seth gets hurt in a match that in the grand scheme of things doesn't mean a goddamn thing. And it derails plans to do him and Punk. And then Punk gets hurt. And Seth's out of the mix. But Seth is able to get back, get healthy enough to put Drew McIntyre over. Not before he finds his way into the Cody Roman Rock feud and ends up tagging with Cody on the first night of WrestleMania and losing. And then early on night 2, he loses to Drew McIntyre. And then at the end of night 2, he still comes back. And as a literal shield, saves Cody and allows Cody to win the championship. He came back from a knee injury in a couple of months to do nothing but make everybody else look better. And because of his stature and because of his resume and because of his reputation and how he is seen by the fans, it all worked. It all mattered more. And I think people will always remember that. And I would hope the company knows what Seth did. Seth had one of the greatest WrestleManias in a way that is unlike anybody else, and that he was unbelievably unselfish for 2 days. He got paid. I get all that. And he got to be in a main event on night 1. And he got to be in 3 different matches at WrestleMania, basically. But he is pretty bulletproof because of that. And his stature and his resume and his legacy, they're set. They're good to go. Which is why he's the right kind of guy to help a Bronson Reed get to the next level. But I want to come back to Bronson here because, as I said, when you took that shot of him last night in the parking lot and he zoomed out, he has run here and there. He ran from Braun. But mostly he just wants to wreck people to make a case for himself. That's what this has always been about. Cool, Adam Pearce, you're not going to give me opportunities. I'm going to create them. And that's what he's done. And he's continuing to do so, which is the key to me. And now there is almost, and you tell me if you feel this way. Leave it in the comments. Leave it in the live chat if you're watching here as a member at 11 a.m. this morning or watching after the fact or you're listening in the podcast. What is your perception of Bronson Reed now? Because to me, he's become a guy where when I see him, I'm paying closer attention because something's probably going to happen. Something wild's going to happen. And you can't do that every week. You can't, because it'll get old and it won't be as special. But he's done it enough. And that's the key. Enough. That now my expectation is anything could happen with this guy. And I feel like there is a loose comparison to Stone Cold in that way. In nothing more than the Zamboni, the beer truck, the monster truck, crushing rocks, Lincoln Continental, the pickup truck, all the wild stuff Austin would do. Crash TV, we talked about that probably about a month ago here on this channel as it related to Bronson and Braun. But Austin had established his reputation of, geez, anything could, he can get arrested. And Bronson's starting to get that. And I was doing Busted Open Radio last night, and I was talking about that with our producer before the show. His name is Susumu, and he's like, oh, it's kind of like what they did with Braun. And he was right, because if you remember Braun's singles push, not Wyatt family stuff, he was doing all kinds of ridiculous feats of strength. He was pushing stuff over. He was flipping cars. You name it. He's breaking the set, and it looked great because he's this giant human being causing destruction. It's why they did that, Last Monster Standing, and it was Godzilla, King Kong type of thing. It's destruction. It's fun to see. It's pro wrestling. It's liquid pro wrestling to me. Hey, let's just watch two giant dudes wreck shit. And that's now the reputation that Bronson Reed has. And it's made him interesting. And it's made him someone who I look forward to seeing. And I'll tell you right now, in Bronson Reed's first run with the company, Hunter liked him. There was a time he was supposed to win the North American Championship, I think in like 2019 or 2020 or something like that. They changed plans, but he was supposed to win. He would end up winning it down the road, but he was supposed to win it before that. And then Hunter out of power. Bronson gets released. He goes and works in Japan. God, he's got to win over Okada. And then he came back. And Hunter liked him. Hunter always liked him. But I interviewed him a couple times. I watched people interview him. He wasn't connecting. The promos weren't what they needed to be. They've now figured out what he needs to be. He doesn't need to say a lot. He could talk enough. Believe me, he's okay in that. But it's about his actions. And they now have something with him where he's a unique part of the show. And that is an attraction. Nerdy Dude, here are €5 for you, man. Hey, thank you very much, Nerdy Dude. Let me put that up. Thank you very much. How about I put it up there, Dom? Sure, producer Dom. I gotcha. Good stuff there. Thank you very much. Nerdy Dude, let's read a couple of these comments. Imagine Bronson beats Seth and CM Punk comes back from his break and goes after Bronson, potentially before the Punk and Seth. Maybe. Yeah, Punk is an interesting name. Because he really hasn't done all that much. He's been back for 11 months now. He has talked. He's had a couple of those early promos where he talked about everybody, but then he was in the Rumble. He got hurt, and it looked like him and Seth were going to do something. And then obviously went to him and Drew. But that's pretty much been it. It's been him and Drew. And now that's done. So, there's so much there for Punk to do and sink his teeth into. And what's that going to bring? Is he going to go after Gunther? Is he going to go after Bronson Reed? Where does he land after all the stuff with Drew? And it's good that they're giving him and Drew time to refresh. I think that's the right call. Yeah, Punk is somebody they could sink their teeth into. Nerdy Dude also says, I also feel like Bronson feels much more comfortable being a heel than a face. Absolutely he does, especially with what he's doing. And there is an element of a baby face that will come out of that. It's similar to how the Big Show was. There's just something so impressive about guys that big that can do that stuff that at some point you're just going to like them. And that won't be a hard turn. But I agree, right now, you point him at baby faces. You point him at people he's bigger than. You let him play a bully of sorts. You let him attack people when they shouldn't be attacked. That's enough. But if he keeps doing this stuff, I agree. I think there is a babyface run in Bronson. But there's no rush to get to that. Now, this morning, as I said earlier, we were given the news that WWE, I'm going to read their press release and all this stuff about this. Here's the tweet from this morning. WWE has launched WWEID. There is a Twitter account for that, which says, follow the stories of WWEID prospects and wrestling schools as they travel the pathway of WWE independent development. And I will note that WWE independent and development are all capitalized. So that is their buzzwords for all this. Here is the release. WWE today announced a launch of a first-of-its-kind developmental program designed to provide up-and-coming independent wrestlers a pathway to a potential career in WWE. The program will be called WWEID, short for WWE Independent Development. And by the way, that is trademarked. From Paul Levesque, WWEID is the latest in our efforts to identify and support the journey of up-and-coming wrestlers, in turn raising the profile and strengthening the independent wrestling ecosystem. I'll have more on that in a second. Following launch of 2021 launch of WWE's NIL program, WWEID has been constructed to support independent wrestling prospects and wrestling schools with world-class training, development, and mentorship. Under the program, WWE will provide prominent independent wrestling schools with the WWEID official designation, with the goal of providing new trainees and existing talent at these select institutions with enhanced development opportunities. Booker T's Reality of Wrestling in Houston, Cody Rhodes' Nightmare Factory in Atlanta, Seth Rollins' Black and Brave Academy Academy in Davenport, Iowa, Elite Pro Wrestling Training Center in Concord, New Hampshire, and KnoxX Pro Academy in Los Angeles are the first WWEID independent wrestling schools to earn the official designation. Additionally, WWE will identify top independent wrestling prospects with an official WWEID, quote, prospect designation and support their developmental journey by providing financial opportunity and assisting with training, mentorship, developmental, including access to world-class facilities, best-in-class training, athletic trainers, and more. WWEID will give the fans the opportunity to follow the paths, these standout prospects on the independent wrestling scene through created behind-the-scenes content as well as highlights and matches showcased across WWE's social platforms. Okay. Let's cut through all the company lines and mumbo jumbo and all that. What the hell does this mean? Kind of start backwards here. Here's the pros. If you are an independent wrestler in 2024, it is not easy. The majority of people that are indie wrestlers in 2024, it is a struggle. Financially, mentally, physically, geographically. It's hard. There was a amazing depth of talent 10 years ago that WWE, that AEW, that New Japan grabbed from. And some of those people, as we see today, are still allowed to work in multiple places, still allowed to work indies and all that. But the priority became the bigger companies. And if you were a talent that was worth a damn, you were going to be snapped up. And you were certainly going to be snapped up 5 years ago when AEW got started. Now, as I said, I know AEW has and continues to allow their wrestlers to work other promotions, to work other indies, and they get right of first refusal, which is what this all comes down to. But COVID did a number on the indie wrestling scene and being able to nurture careers. It is not as deep as it was. And I don't say that with any kind of or I'm looking down. No. Independent wrestling is very important to the future of the big companies as a whole. You have to start somewhere. And you have to gain that experience. Valuable experience on your own. Riding the roads. Making the towns, working in small. I'm not equating it to you have to pay your dues. That's all part of the learning experience, is doing all that stuff and working with people you're not used to working with, and working with people that are better than you, and working in venues that are different, that you have to play to the crowd differently. And you know, independent wrestling, for the most part, is about getting yourself over to a new crowd every time you step out there. And sure, some indies, run stories and they bring the same people back. But if you're not under contract, you don't always have access to those people, so you can't continue. You can't go too deep in certain stories. Certain places can do that. But I'll tell you what, they can't do it up and down their entire card. You watch AEW, you watch WWE, you watch TNA. Everybody on the card that you're going to see is probably involved in something. On an indie show, you can't really do that. If it's a GCW and you have the Cardona storyline and, you can have these matches but that can't, the whole card can't be that way. Sometimes it's just, hey, we're going to throw two people or a tag team or a 6-man or a scramble. We're going to throw that out there just for entertainment purposes. And maybe hey, I like that guy. Hey, I remember hearing about Speedball, Mike Bailey, years ago. And then he got stuck in Canada because of visa stuff and he couldn't make shot. But I remember hearing about the buzz of him. I remember watching PWG and getting introduced to so many people that I hadn't really seen a lot of before. And obviously all these people get snatched up and signed and all that. And, it's a bummer that there are no, and I know the person who runs PWG has dealt with some family issues and health issues. But that used to be, you watch those clips of, it's everybody you see everywhere now. and they're not running right now. And that depth of talent, it doesn't exist in the same way. I hope it does. So I will say that if people get identified and they get this title on them, there is a positive of, it sounds like there's financial opportunities that will be afforded to them. Whatever that means, I don't really know. Does that mean WWE will book them for shows and they'll get paid? I like that they get the, medical treatment and all that. Because, this weekend, Chris Bay on the TNA show got injured. Best wishes out to him. A lot of people are concerned about him right now. I don't know what his contract is with TNA. I know it's not an AEW contract. I know it's not a WWE contract. I don't know what he's making. Vikingo got hurt. When you get hurt and you're not with one of the big places, it is scary. Because you're worried about insurance. You're worried about paying your bills. You're worried about, does that take you out of your shoot job if you're, not doing indie wrestling or wrestling full time? And if you're using wrestling to pay the bills and all of a sudden you're injured now and you have to pay for it, that's scary. WWE doesn't give you insurance, but, I talked to Mark Henry about this the other day. If you get hurt or you need assistance because of something that happened, they pay for it. Rehab, ACL surgeries, they take care of that, as they should. You don't have that on the indies. So, maybe it allows for a little bit more of a cushion, a little bit more safety, a little bit more security. That's the positive of this. The negative of this is you're not an independent promotion if you're working with WWE. And I'm not taking a shot at Seth or Cody or Booker. No. There are elements of what OVW was, what Heartland Wrestling was, what Smoky Mountain was, what Florida Championship Wrestling was, which became obviously more than that. There have been relationships that existed with training schools or training grounds or indies or whatever. That's not a new thing. The last time they really did this was with Evolve, with Gabe Sapolsky, who, was on the payroll then. And I'm sure he will be part of this because he continues to travel and do seminars and all that. But, WWE was working with Evolve, and they sent the Street Profits down there. Here's a wild, I don't know if people know this. When the Street Profits were kind of treading water, they went to the Street Profits worked Eddie Kingston. I can't remember who he tagged with, but they worked Eddie Kingston while they were under WWE contract because Eddie Kingston was in Evolve. And they got better working down there. Now, we've talked about the TNA partnership and how I said, the people who we don't see a lot of and who need the reps, that is who's going to benefit from the TNA partnership. Whether that's working or not, I don't know. And we have seen people like Ivy Nile. I think Roxanne went back there. Have gone back to, Booker School. We've seen the Creed brothers, Shayna, Zoe appeared for Bloodsport. Obviously, EO went to Marigold and wrestled there. And I wouldn't be surprised if we hear, that Marigold or Noah, because they sent people to Noah, got this WWEID distinction. That might happen. And there was talk, the global localization. We're going to put NXT here. We're going to put it. It feels like we're getting back to that. Now, this happened in the UK. And they started up NXT UK. And, that was about, Pete Dunne and Tyler Bate and Trent Seven and Tony Storm and Rhea Ripley and all them. And they had what NXT UK became. And Gunther. And look, as we come back on the other end of that, we now have Gunther. Tony Storm went through WWE, gone. Rhea Ripley, though. Ilya Dragunov, who's I know recovering from the torn ACL. Piper Niven. And I know there's more. Gallus, whatever. Things came out of that. But initially, when they started NXT UK, it was positive and this is going to be good for the scene. And then people started to have to cancel their appearances, and WWE would yank people. And then it's, oh, well, these people from this other company are working there. You can't work there. And that booming UK scene didn't boom anymore. And there are a lot of people who will tell you that NXT UK killed the indie scene in England. And I think it's coming back a little bit more now, but it's not what it was at. And then it became about working partnerships and all that. And what's that going to be? Because is this going to turn into, well, people who work at reality wrestling that go work other shows, they're WWE people, so, they can't go work on a show with these. That is where you run into trouble. That is where you run into the red tape. That is where you run into the, well, WWE's paying me, so I have to do this, this, and this. And then there's also the thought, and I've seen people express this, of, well, I have to do what WWE says, or I have to follow their style, or this is how they want to do things. And that was always a thing. Well, we don't want people going out and doing stuff because they're going to pick up bad habits. Yeah, but also working in the same warehouse with the same coaches day after day and rehearsing everything doesn't allow you to build your instincts. I am going to be interested to see how much input, how much say-so, any rules or restrictions that WWE will put on these other promotions. How much will they let them run on their own? What is the oversight there? If you're working for $1 billion company and you're willing to work with them, hey, it's good for those places. It's good for those schools. And once again, Booker T's school, very reputable, as is Cody's. The right people are working there. The same thing with Seth. The idea that they're going to create content out of this is smart, and maybe that's a Netflix show, and it's the next kind of Tough Enough thing, or an iteration of what's that journey like. And I'm all for that. I think that's cool. That is a way, by the way, to create organic fan bases. Hey, here's whoever. We got to watch their journey. You got to live their journey with them. That stuff connects with fans more than the NIL thing of, oh, it's a great Division I athlete from the. Yeah, I know they battled, but they're all the same. They're all the same story. They were great. This is much more of a relatable story. And honestly, I think it will, the possibility of it at least, will create more well-rounded, more passionate wrestlers than recruiting from D1 schools and talking to kids who have no idea what wrestling is. Some of them can be taught. Some of them can learn it. Some of them can pick up the passion. I don't think that's happening regularly. There's a lot of education that has to happen. And I've always believed that the best pro wrestlers are ones that have a passion for it and always did and were fans at some point in their life. It's just going to make it better. Now, you can have the Tiffany Strattons of the world, even though she trained beforehand, and you can have the Lash Legends, and you can have the Tony D'Angelos, but, there are still connections to some of them where they enjoyed wrestling at some point in time. Other NIL athletes are just like, I have no idea what this is, but I here's the bells and the whistles, and here's all the amazing things that I can get, and I can be presented as a star, and, the Cavender twins and all that. And it's like, do they really care about wrestling? Because that will come through if they don't. Nerdy Dude said, the same can be said about WXW in Germany. Once WWE snatched the likes of Gunther and Ilya as an example, the German indie scene suffered greatly. Yes, and that is what I worry about for an indie scene that is not super strong as it is. And just in general. And I know there's a lot of good people out there. I know there's a lot of good promotions. And I know there's a lot of great talent. It's not what it was. And I hope this doesn't hinder it. I'm going to have my reservations, as everybody should, because I've seen this before. Let's see how they handle this. Let's see how these wrestlers that get these deals and get these IDs or whatever the hell, let's see what their journey looks like. Let's see if it's helping them. Let's see if that creates the next crop of talent. Let's see what this does in relation to NIL, or if they scale back on that. But you know me. You got to get reps. You got to be out there and doing it. Maybe, as I said, we've seen WWE talent pop up in some of these indies. Maybe that'll become more of a regular thing. You know, when OVW was the developmental of sorts, they'd have big shows like Six Flags down there or whatever. And, the Kane's on the show, or they sent this person down, and it's one of the big Raw or SmackDown superstars to come and work the show. I could see that happening with some of these places on a more regular basis. And you know what? That's a draw for people. Maybe that'll strengthen those promotions. Now, here's the thing. Reality of Wrestling runs. They have, like, Booker T has his own building there. Seth's school, as far as I know, is a school. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. So that might be just about training now. If they're going to add stuff, or they want to, branch out into running small shows, the Nightmare Factory with Cody runs these showcase shows for everything that they've learned, but they're not like regularly run shows. They go out and work shows. So what's that going to entail? What's the difference between a school that also is a promotion and a school that's just a school? How's that going to work? And then what other indies are going to try and get involved? You think about people who are Hall of Famers that have schools, what does this mean to a Flatbacks with, Spears and Tyler Breeze running it? Devon's got a school. Bubba's got a school. More opening up. I think Pete Dunne and those guys were getting involved in something. Maybe Grizzled Young Vets or Mark Andrews. Like, there's that. How do they get mixed in? Do they want to be mixed in? So I wouldn't look at it as super positive. I wouldn't look at it as super negative. But I have my reservations about the whole thing. Because independent wrestling, the heart of it and what you learn from it has nothing to do with being backed by $1 billion corporation. And we'll see what comes of that. And we may not know for 6 months to a year, but it's very much a wait and see situation. I appreciate you joining me here today. If you're a member, thanks for being with us on the live episode at 11 a.m. Eastern. Everybody else, thanks for joining us after the fact. And if you want to be here live for the Wrestling Mat at 11 a.m. Eastern every single weekday, you got to become a member at thewrestlingmatshow.com. Be like Nerdy Dude. Be like him and get a shirt at prowrestlingtees.com/thewrestlingmat. You get discounts on that merch if you're a member. Make sure you subscribe for free to thewrestlingmatshow.com. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Everybody else who's enjoyed the show later on, thank you very much. Leave your comments here. If you have super chats in the chat for the later viewing of the show at 5 p.m. Eastern, they will be answered tomorrow. We will have those ready for you, so still feel free to get those in here. Thank you for being with me. No matter when you watch, please leave comments. Make sure you're following us on social media at WrestlingMat23, at the Matt Camp, because I'll be back tomorrow to talk about wrestling even more right here on the Wrestling Mat.